My family secretly planned for my desperate brother to propose at my wedding to trap his girlfriend who was pulling away from him. When I threatened to cut off financial support and exposed his manipulation, she immediately broke up with him, and my family was forced to confront years of enabling his toxic behavior. Planning a spring wedding should have been one of the happiest times in my life, but my family had other ideas that would turn what should have been joyful preparation into a nightmare I never saw coming. My fiancé had always dreamed of an April wedding, and after 2 years of saving every penny, we'd finally booked the perfect venue overlooking the lake where we had our first date. What I didn't expect was for my older brother to see our special day as the perfect opportunity to solve his own relationship problems. The first red flag came 3 months before the wedding, when my brother started asking unusually detailed questions about our timeline. What time is the ceremony? How long is the reception? When are you doing speeches? At first I thought he was just being supportive, maybe planning a surprise or wanting to coordinate his travel. My parents seemed unusually interested in these details too, which should have tipped me off that something was brewing behind the scenes. Last Saturday, I got the call that changed everything. My parents asked me to come over for an urgent family discussion, but refused to give any details over the phone. The secrecy immediately put me on edge. When I walked into their living room, I found my 30-year-old brother sitting on the couch next to my parents, all three wearing expressions like they'd just planned a surprise party, except this surprise was about to ruin my life. "We have something wonderful to share with you," my mother began, practically glowing with excitement. "Your brother has decided he wants to propose to Sarah at your wedding. Isn't that romantic? 2 love stories celebrating on the same day?" My father jumped in before I could respond, explaining how they'd been planning this for weeks. They'd already figured out the perfect timing, right after our first dance, when everyone would be feeling emotional and romantic. The audacity hit me like a physical blow. They had spent weeks plotting to turn my wedding into my brother's proposal stage, making detailed plans without once considering how I might feel about it. I sat there stunned as they outlined their elaborate scheme. My brother would ask the DJ to make a special announcement, get down on one knee in the middle of the dance floor, and turn our reception into his engagement party. "Absolutely not," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "This is my wedding day, not a backdrop for your proposal." The room went silent, and I watched their excited expressions crumble into confusion and disappointment. My mother's face fell as if I'd just told her Christmas was canceled. My father looked genuinely bewildered that I wasn't thrilled by their generous plan to share my spotlight. "But think about how special it would be," my mother pleaded. "Sarah would be so surprised, and you'd always have this beautiful memory of your brother finding love on your wedding day." My brother finally spoke up, his voice taking on a desperate edge that revealed more than he probably intended. "Come on, you know how much Sarah means to me. She's been hinting about marriage for months, and I need this to be perfect. I need her to say yes." That's when the real truth started spilling out. My brother admitted he'd been feeling insecure about his relationship lately. Sarah had been distant, and he was worried she might be losing interest. He'd convinced himself that a public romantic proposal at a wedding would be impossible for her to refuse. The plan wasn't about romance. It was about emotional manipulation, using social pressure and the romantic atmosphere to trap Sarah into accepting a proposal she might otherwise decline. I exploded. "So you want to hijack my wedding to manipulate your girlfriend? You want to put her in a position where she can't say no without humiliating herself in front of 100 people?" My brother's face flushed red, but he doubled down. "It's not manipulation, it's romantic. Women love public proposals." The fact that he couldn't see the difference was both infuriating and terrifying. My parents immediately jumped to his defense. "You're being dramatic," my father said. "It's just a few minutes and it would make the day even more memorable." My mother added that I was being selfish and jealous of my brother's happiness. The coordinated nature of their attack made it clear this had all been planned and rehearsed. That's when I dropped the bombshell that changed everything. "If you go through with this plan, not only are all 3 of you uninvited from my wedding, but I'm also cutting off the financial support I've been giving you." The room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop as the weight of my ultimatum sank in. For the past year, I'd been sending my parents $500 monthly to help with their mortgage after they'd nearly lost their house. The financial crisis had started when they took out a second mortgage to pay for my brother's college education, an education he never completed. After he dropped out in his junior year, they were left with crushing debt and no way to recover the lost tuition money. I'd stepped in to help because I couldn't bear watching them lose their home over their son's failures. My parents' faces went white as they realized I was serious. My brother's smugness evaporated instantly, replaced by genuine panic. "You can't cut them off over this," he stammered. "They need that money." I looked him straight in the eye. "Then maybe you should have thought about that before trying to turn my wedding into your personal drama show." The argument that followed was brutal. My mother started crying, saying I was destroying the family over one small favor. My father accused me of using money to control them. But my brother's reaction was the most telling. He started screaming about how I was ruining his only chance with Sarah, confirming that his entire plan was based on desperation rather than genuine love. I left without another word, hoping the shock would bring them to their senses. But my brother wasn't done. He showed up at my apartment the next day, not to apologize, but to try a different approach. This time, he brought back up Sarah herself, who clearly had no idea what was really going on. "Your brother told me you're having some concerns about our relationship," Sarah said awkwardly, clearly confused about why she'd been dragged into this conversation. "He said you think I don't make him happy?" I realized immediately that my brother had lied to get Sarah to come with him, probably spinning some story about family disapproval to gain her sympathy and support. I had a choice: expose my brother's lies right there in front of Sarah, or handle this more carefully. I chose the careful approach. "Sarah, did my brother tell you about his plans for my wedding?" The confusion on her face told me everything I needed to know. He hadn't mentioned the proposal scheme to her at all. She had no idea she was being set up for emotional manipulation on the biggest scale imaginable. "What plans?" she asked, looking between my brother and me. I watched my brother's face go pale as he realized his lies were about to be exposed. "He wants to propose to you at my wedding," I said gently, in front of all our guests during the reception. Sarah's expression shifted from confusion to shock, to something that looked like horror. "You want to propose at someone else's wedding?" she asked my brother, her voice rising with each word. Without asking them first, without even telling me, the look of betrayal on her face was devastating. My brother started backpedaling frantically, claiming it was just an idea, that he thought she'd love the romance of it. But Sarah was already shaking her head. "That's not romantic. That's selfish," she said quietly. "And manipulative. You want to put me on the spot in front of strangers so I can't say anything but yes?" My brother tried to argue, but Sarah held up her hand. "I need some time to think, she said, and walked out of my apartment, leaving my brother standing there looking like his world had just collapsed. After Sarah left, my brother completely lost it. He screamed at me for ruining everything and destroying his relationship, but I could see the fear in his eyes. Not just fear of losing Sarah, but fear of facing the truth about his own behavior. She was going to leave me anyway, he finally admitted. I could feel her pulling away. This was supposed to fix everything. You can't fix a relationship by trapping someone into an engagement, I told him. If Sarah's pulling away, maybe you need to figure out why instead of trying to manipulate her into staying. But my brother wasn't interested in self-reflection. He stormed out, leaving me wondering if I'd just saved Sarah from making a terrible mistake or destroyed their relationship entirely. The fallout was immediate and intense. My grandmother called within hours, having received a heavily edited version of events from my brother. According to his story, I was jealous of his happiness and using money to control the family. She spent 20 minutes lecturing me about family loyalty before I finally hung up on her. My parents called later, still trying to convince me to change my mind, alternating between guilt trips and threats. The real turning point came 3 days later when Sarah called me directly. She thanked me for opening her eyes to my brother's manipulative behavior. I've been feeling pressured for months, she admitted. He's been pushing for engagement constantly, and I kept telling him I wasn't ready. I thought the wedding proposal thing was just him being romantic, but now I see it for what it really was. She told me she'd broken up with my brother that morning. I can't be with someone who thinks it's okay to manipulate me like that, she said. And using your wedding as a backdrop for his insecurities, that's just cruel. I felt bad for her, but also relieved that she'd escaped what would have been a disaster of an engagement built on manipulation rather than mutual love and respect. My brother's reaction to the breakup was predictably explosive. He blamed me for poisoning Sarah against him and claimed I'd destroyed his life out of jealousy. He even tried to convince our parents that Sarah had only broken up with him because of my interference, refusing to acknowledge that his own manipulative behavior had been the real problem all along. The family dynamics shifted dramatically after that. My parents eventually came around, admitting that my brother's plan had been inappropriate and that they'd gotten caught up in his desperation without thinking it through. They apologized for the ambush and the pressure campaign, though it took several weeks of tense conversations before we reached that point. My grandmother was harder to convince, but even she eventually acknowledged that using someone else's wedding for a surprise proposal was poor etiquette. The fact that the proposal was motivated by desperation rather than genuine romantic timing made it even worse in her traditional view of how courtship should work. The financial support issue became a non-factor once my parents sided with me on the wedding controversy. I continued helping them with their mortgage, but the incident had established clear boundaries about what kind of behavior I would and wouldn't tolerate from my family. My brother took months to accept that his relationship with Sarah was truly over. He went through stages of anger, denial, and eventually a kind of bitter acceptance that painted him as the victim of my jealousy and Sarah's inability to appreciate romance. He never did acknowledge that his plan had been manipulative or that his approach to the relationship had been fundamentally flawed from the start. The wedding itself was everything my fiancé and I had hoped it would be. Beautiful weather, perfect venue, friends and family celebrating our love without any drama or unwanted surprises. My parents were there, visibly emotional during our vows, and even my grandmother managed to enjoy herself once she realized the day was about genuine love rather than manipulation or family politics. My brother attended too, though he spent most of the reception sulking in a corner and left early without saying goodbye. Several guests asked me later why he seemed so unhappy at such a joyful occasion, but I just told them he was going through a tough time personally. There was no need to air family drama at our celebration. Looking back, I'm grateful the confrontation happened when it did. It forced everyone to confront patterns of enabling and manipulation that had been poisoning our family relationships for years. My brother's proposal scheme was just the most obvious symptom of deeper problems. His sense of entitlement, his willingness to manipulate others, and the family's tendency to enable his worst impulses rather than holding him accountable. The incident also taught me valuable lessons about setting boundaries and standing up for what matters most. Sometimes protecting your happiness requires being willing to disappoint people who claim to love you, but consistently prioritize their own needs over your well-being. Real family members celebrate your joy rather than trying to exploit it for their own purposes. 6 months later, I heard through family gossip that my brother had started dating someone new. I genuinely hoped he'd learned from his mistakes with Sarah and was approaching this new relationship with more honesty and less desperation. But given his complete inability to acknowledge his own role in the previous relationship's failure, I wasn't particularly optimistic about his chances for lasting happiness. The most important outcome was that my fiancé and I started our marriage with clear boundaries and a united front against family manipulation. We'd faced our first major test as a couple and emerged stronger, more committed to protecting our relationship from outside pressures and unwanted interference. So that's the story. But honestly, I think the next one is even wilder. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss it. And in the meantime, let me know in the comments what you would have done in this situation.